Thank you all for coming. It is our pleasure to host Matthew Day Jackson as a visiting artist to the painting department. Matthew Day Jackson is a Brooklyn-based artist whose multifaceted practice encompasses sculpture, painting, collage, photography, drawing, video, performance, and installation. He received his BFA at the University of Washington in Seattle and his MFA at the Mason Gross School of Fine Arts at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. He has additionally studied at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and has received an NHRA Supercomp dragster license from the Frank Howley's Racing School in Gainesville, Florida. Jackson's recent solo exhibitions include, from this year, Pareidolia at Grimm in Keizersgracht, Amsterdam, Ma at the Giosta Serlatius Museum in Manta, Finland, Van Gogh Inspire Matthew Day Jackson at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and Pathetic Fallacy at Hauser & Wirth in Somerset, UK. From 2018, his solo shows include New Landscape at the Kiao Space in Shanghai and Still Life and the Reclining Nude at Hauser & Wirth in London. Additional solo exhibitions have been held at Hauser & Wirth, Zurich in 2014, Hauser & Wirth, New York, and the ZKM Museum in Karlsruhe, Germany in 2013, the GEM Museum of Contemporary Art in The Hague in 2012, the Museum of Modern Art in Bologna, Italy, and the Kunstmuseum Luzern in Lucerne, Switzerland, both in 2011. The MIT List Visual Arts Center in Cambridge, and the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston, Texas in 2009. He has exhibited internationally in frequent group exhibitions at museums and galleries including Ludwig Forum in Aachen, Germany in 2019, the Oakland Museum of Art in Oakland, California in 2016, the Hiroshima City Museum of Contemporary Art in Hiroshima, and Marion Boesky in New York, among others. His work is included in many private and public collections, such as the Whitney Museum for American Art in New York, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Museum of Modern Art in Bologna, and the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. So please join me in welcoming Matthew Day Jackson.
Sometimes I go out by myself and I look across the water. Turn it up. And I think of all the things that you're doing, and I paint a picture. Since I've come on home and my body's been a mess, I missed your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Won't you come on over? Stop making a fool out of me. Why don't you come on over, Valerie? Valerie. 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 Did you have to go to jail? Put your house up for sale? Did you get a good lawyer? Hope you didn't catch a tan. Hope you found the right man who'll fix it for you. Are you shopping anywhere? Change the color of your hair. Are you busy? Did you have to pay that fine that you're dodging all the time? Are you still dizzy? Since I've come on home and my body's been a mess, I missed your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Won't you come on over? Stop making a fool out of me. Why don't you come on over, Valerie? Valerie. 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 of all the things what you're doing, and I paint a picture. Since I've come on home and my body's been a mess, miss your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Won't you come on over, stop making a fool out of me? Why don't you come on over, Valerie? Valerie, 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 There's another song I couldn't find later, but maybe we'll do something about it. I think that there's like, I figured I have to make these things interesting for me. Because if you think you're bored listening to me, I'm more bored listening to me, because I have to listen to me all the time. So, but I thought that like it would be fun. I think karaoke is an excellent exercise, and like one of the first classes I taught at NYU, I wanted to start by having everybody be like, all right, everybody put your bags down. We're going to Koreatown. We're going to do karaoke. And I felt like the way that I use reference in the work and how things are like kind of like very, very close to who they're, to the original form, I thought it's like how we bring our own experience and intonation to these things that we've seen many, many, many times to make them strange and new again. And so I think that that would be like a fun way to think about that. So I'm doing a talk that I don't ever prepare for these things, and so you kind of have to wait and like watch me bumble through. But I don't believe in preparing for talks, because I think that this is an opportunity for me to learn about me as well, that I find in this like incredibly stressful situation. Like singing a song makes me happy, it breaks the ice a little bit, but at the same time I find myself saying things that I've never heard myself say before that are actually quite honest, and so that I appreciate. The framework of the talk tonight, it revolves around one show and one experience that I most recently had kind of over the last roughly year in Finland. I couldn't find a photograph of it, so you kind of have to imagine. So I'm in this, flew to Helsinki. I took a 2-hour train to Tampere, and from Tampere to Montavilpula. I was in a horrifying Porsche Cayenne taxi driver. So they drove like, I swear it was like 120 miles an hour the whole time, like through the Finnish forest. And, and we're driving way out there. And it's almost like driving to Marfa, Texas. And I was like, okay, like, so I'm gonna have an exhibition, and the museum is like totally beautiful, unbelievable facility. It's like gorgeous and super cool. It kind of weirdly feels like here in a weird way. It's like lots of brick and like trees and water and stuff. And I was like, okay, so like I'll have a museum exhibition in this town, in this, not even a town, in a museum in the middle of the woods in Finland, and like 3 people will see it. And that's cool, because that's like my speed. That sounds good. So I go there, and we show the museum, and they organize a dinner at the museum. It's just me, Pauli, who's the director of the museum, Tarja Vaktanen, who is the woman who is in charge of all installation, who's like Peter Stewart. She can like do anything. If you don't know Peter Stewart works with me in the studio. He can he can make anything. And then Timo Valjaka, who is the curator. And I'm there totally jet-lagged, almost falling asleep. The story's like a little bit long, but as soon as it stops, then it will all make sense. I'm sitting there, and it's cold, and they can't get the fire lit, and so the cabin that we're in that's like just next to the museum, it's more like a house, I guess, but all wood floor, like it was probably 200-year-old house. And the flue in the chimney wasn't getting hot enough, so the smoke was not evacuating, and I'm super jet lagged, and I'm like just sitting down knowing that I'm gonna get really sleepy sitting at dinner. So like, what am I gonna do? Like, I can't sing a karaoke song to like, make me happy or awake. And so I'm like, start conversation by being like, tell me something weird about this place. And they're like, well, I get a walk through the Finnish Civil War. I was there at the time of its centennial, and learned about this particular area, why this beautiful museum that has like an installation crew and tools that would make like the Tate jealous. Unbelievable. And I was like, how does this exist? And they're like, well, every newspaper that you read between like 1920 and like 1990 was printed on paper from here. I was like, oh, wow. Anyway, so they tell me all these things, and then Timo, the curator, is like, well, there's this town called Kolho, and the people that I was sitting with, they're like, oh, yeah, that's really weird. And I was like, why is that weird? And apparently Kolho, like they were describing to me, Kolho is a town, Kolho means like empty or haunted or vacant. And one of them said something really funny that I didn't understand. They're like, well, it's like an old woman who lives in a house by herself, and she has a cup and a saucer. And yeah, and I was like, I don't understand or get that. And they're like Finnish, like there's like, so we on average can, like Americans go on average like 20 seconds in silence without being like, oh my God, I'm like really uncomfortable. They can go like 2.5 minutes while still being in conversation. Like we're all uncomfortable. That was like 10 seconds. Can you imagine 2.5? That would be like, I have a friend who got married to a Finnish woman, and he took her father out to dinner to kind of like do the old-fashioned-y thing and be like, I would like to marry your daughter, sir. And they sat down, they ordered, and he was like, I'm in love with your daughter, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yes. And then they ordered, and then he pulled out a book and read through the entire dinner. Didn't say anything, and then at the end of dinner, he was like, we're very excited and proud to have you as a part of our family, and thank you very much for having dinner with us. And he was just like, that's like really uncomfortable. Anyway, and so they tell me about this town called Kolho, and then they're like, yeah, and I think, like I've made a lot of work that kind of touches on our own Civil War and how like the legacy of like how like people would talk about Barack Obama as a socialist, and how the intonations of saying socialist were actually saying much, much darker things, and how this is embedded in the bedrock of our culture, our Civil War. And so there was ties to that. And then they were also talking about how like the burgeoning residential architecture led to these developments, and a lot of things that were very similar to the United States suburban developments. And then they told me about Kolho, and they're like, and I think the first airport in Finland is in Kolho. And I was like, weird. And then I Google Kolho, and the first thing that pops up is Formica Iki Oy, which means like Formica Forever International Corporation. This is 6 miles away from the museum. And then the next one, I go to the Wikipedia page, and it is the first airport, but also at the same time, there are 2 immigrants that came from Kolho to the United States, father, son, James Kolho, who developed the first all-metal Ford auto body for Henry Ford after he sold his auto bodies Model A factory to Joseph Stalin for, I think, like $5 million of gold. No money exchanged hand, it was all gold. And I've made a lot of work about how this is the beginning of a sort of mirroring that's happened throughout the entire Cold War, but it starts with an industrial collaboration, right? The bringing in of like modern industry to the Soviet Union was like also the anchoring of the town called Nizhny Novgorod. It was Gorky at the time, but Nizhny Novgorod was basically the equivalent of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Detroit. And it was a secret city. Wild. And then I found out that his son, also named James Vaco from Kolho, went on to lead Chrysler's space division to who developed the first rockets for the Saturn rocket for all the Apollo missions went to the moon on. At that point, I was like, I'm here in the middle of nowhere, and somehow all the things that I make and I'm concerned about are like within a 6-mile radius of this weird little museum that none of us knew. So anyway, now I'm going to go faster. We tried to organize a tour of the museum. It was not possible. As soon as I arrived home, I was invited back to Finland by a collector in Sarvisalo, where I have a permanent artwork in the ground called Hauta, which is Finnish for tomb. So I'm hurrying up now, fly back to Finland. I get in a taxi cab, drive to Sarvisalo. I get out of the taxi cab. There's a group of like fancy people, like getting a tour of arts. And I walk over, and this guy named Nicholas comes over, and he's like, hey, you're the guy that made the hole in the ground over there. And I was like, yeah, that was me. And he's like, that's cool. And I was like, well, what do you do? And he's like, I make furniture. I was like, oh, yeah, cool, I make furniture too. And he's like, oh, wow, cool. And he's like, we should make furniture together. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's great. Because, I left something out. Because on the Monday after going to see this group in Sarvisalo, I had scheduled a tour of the Formica factory in Kolho. And so I tell him, well, Nicholas, interesting you say that, because I'm going to the Formica factory on Monday, and I'm going to make the dark side of the moon in Formica. I had not talked to Formica at this point. And he was like, oh, that sounds great. And I was like, yeah, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Like on some chairs or tables or something like that? And it's like, and my interest in Formica, and particularly in making the dark side of the moon, is that when you can bleed on Formica, you can spill whatever on Formica, have horrible arguments with people that you love, and wipe it clean, and nothing ever happened. And so I liked how, like, to make a topography of the far side of the moon in this particular material meant that, like, it was, like, just the Formica piece itself with this topography was an artwork in and of itself. Anyway, we parted ways in Sarvisalo. I go 2-hour train ride to Tampere, a horrifying taxi cab ride to Montevipola, where I get in another moderately terrifying car ride. Everybody drove so fast there. And we go to the factory. I go through the whole factory, like I see that, like, how the whole process works, and at the end of the factory tour, they show me the metal plate. And I was like, oh, wow. That's just photo etching. And I come from printmaking. All of my education as an artist is in printmaking. All my technical education as an artist is in printmaking. And I told him, I was like, okay, so you take this, you take like a TIFF file, turn it into a bitmap. The bitmap gets like screened onto this plate of steel. That's etched, screened, blah, blah. And he's like, oh yeah, that's totally worked. And I was like, we should make the dark side of the moon. He's like, oh, that'd be so great. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And he's like, no. So I was like, but you just said that was a rad idea. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, but I run the factory. I don't make decisions like that. I was like, all right, who makes the decisions? And so in true, like, Finnish style, like, weeks pass in total silence. And I finally get this email back saying, like, this is Phil Wise. He's head of marketing for Formica EU Europe. You should contact him. I send him an email. I tell him the story that I'm telling you, and he's like, that's really weird. And the moon sounds like a great idea, so I think on Monday we should organize a group call with the plate making plant in France. And I was like, yeah, rad. So this is underway. And then at the same time, I go down a very deep rabbit hole of thinking about tables. That's a beautiful sunset that has nothing to do with tables. Or maybe it does. A dancer. This table that I called 3 standard stoppages plus 1, which was Marcel Duchamp, 1 meter string, meter off the ground. It makes a contour, and the contour looks like body-like, figurative. Don't worry, these were just sketches, just to see that the geometry of the table. Like, I can't make drawings. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at making drafting drawings. And so the first one was a dancer. This one was 3 standard stoppages plus 1. Oh, there's the dancer again that you can kind of see it's on point. They're on point. And then there's another series of tables that I wanted to make that were built exactly the same way that the Wright brothers made their first airplane, which is tension and sort of upright sticks, like cables, and sorry, I can't give you the technical terms for that. And all of these tables are based on the golden mean. And they're just sketches. They were just ways of making things in. And then I asked a question which I'd never asked before, like, why did they call Apollo Apollo? Because I have a horrible education, like public school, and they treated me like I was dumb. And so there are a lot of things that I missed, and mythology was one of them, grammar, math, what else? A lot of other things. Somehow history stuck in there. But Apollo is like god of music and art and the sun and like logic and like classification, like order, reason. And he has a super, super naughty brother named Dionysus, who's like the sort of god of like chaos and wine. And so like thinking about those two as like the foundation of like ancient Greek ideas of the individual, I started thinking about like, okay, well, Apollo is like a flat plane. Apollo is like taking an image of land to try to own it, right? Or to demark it or to put a footprint on it. And then Dionysus is like the 300,000 things that had never been done before in order to make a group of 3 human beings on a really like big explosion going 15,000 miles an hour, 300,000 miles to just the outside orbit of the moon to be caught in its orbit so that they could put their footprint on it. Like it's chaos. And so how do you represent that? And so I went down another deep hole. So this is like in between these things, I think there were probably 20 tables, 15 or 16 chairs, all made in plywood scraps. And there's the dancer. And then I started thinking about ways to bisect the golden mean and how that could also be a support for a table. And like, tables are table, like we all sit around them, but we don't think about like furniture, I think, in a really critical way. And one of the things that this gave me the opportunity to do was to think about like a table and chairs and furniture and thinking about what does that mean? Like, so then a table then became theater. Like the chairs that we sit in every day that create like a sort of prescriptive geometry for how our bodies should sit in relationship to like whatever sort of activity that we're doing. Like this is like how we perform culture. Like furniture is like a armature to like celebrate the culture that has created us and that we create in turn. And so it became really satisfying in the same way that one making sculpture might be satisfying or painting. That I think that as soon as the pressure of comfort and utility stepped in, it was the same thing as the pursuit of meaning and to be, fluent or clear. Anyway, I'll stop staring at you, Willie. Sorry. I just find so much comfort in your eyes. Yeah, and so these are just like meditations on Marcel Duchamp and the Wright brothers and snakes. Like, so I arrived at the flat plane and the way that the body is shaped in relationship to the dining experience, which is like more vertical, right? Rather than like a lounge chair that's like that or like a chase lounge that's flatter. The snake, is like tempting us into eternal sin, which I don't believe, but some people believe that. The snake became Dionysus, and this is where it gets weirder. And then there were even more tables made and even more snakes that were cut apart and glued back together again. and set up to see if your knees could dangle where the snakes were and if you could put a chair all the way underneath the table. And I felt like if you were going to make a table, it needs to be flat packed, because if you make a table are there any designers in here? Okay, if you make a table that you can't flat pack, you're going to burn in hell. Right? Sorry, it's just the way it is. But no, I think that I'm kidding. I have to say things to break up the monotony of my monotone voice so that you don't fall asleep. But I think that there's something very, very important about thinking of things in terms of them being modular, right? And at the same time flat packable so that they take up less space shipping. But if you're going to make something that's flat packable, and if you're going to make something that's modular and you don't make it fun to put together, failure. And so in thinking about the table that needed to be comfortable, it had to be useful, it had to be fun to put together, it had to tell a story. And these forced me into thinking about different ways of thinking about sustainability. We think about sustainability about making things out of materials that are recycled, that can be turned into compost or poop or whatever, but we don't think about the things that we actually drag around for our lives and then give to our children, and then our children give that to their children, and so on and so forth. This is another way of thinking about sustainability. I beg meaning from art, I beg utility from design, but in both of them I beg narrative. And the things that we make and the things that we care about and the things that we share, the most intimate experience that you can have in a person's house is around their dining table. Not in a bedroom, not in the bathroom, not in anywhere else but the dining table. How one's personal history percolates through the preparation of a meal and the expectations of how one is to behave around the table is really deep and very beautiful. So anyway, you won't burn in hell, but you made a bad table. So all these tables were thought, how would they be put together and taken apart again. There's my dad and Andy. Hi, Dad and Andy. So Formica sent me some samples when I was in Wyoming, and this was the beginning of the process. There was just a black Formica with the texture. More sort of snake-like things that are making tables, bisected geometry to express something. And then the snake appears in the chair. And how does a snake support the chair? How do you make that out of plywood? And the other thing that was really important that I learned at this time was that you can't really make solid oak furniture in Finland unless you're going to ship it from Sweden. The thing that is as finished as the day is long is plywood, and we think about Alvar Aalto. Oh, the thing that I forgot to leave out that's also really wild is that the person, Nicholas, that I met at the party, his great aunt was Marie Gulliksen, who was the founder with Alvar Aalto of Artec. And they've been to the home, the Villa Maria. Do you guys know what that is? Villa Maria in Finland? No? But this is the birth of bent ply in modern furniture design. The popularization of it, at least. And so I wanted to make something that was really Finnish at the same time. So comfortable, tells a story, fun to put together, made in Finland that's really Finnish and ply Finnish. But also at the same time, I didn't want to make art. And so I ride this bike, and it's made out of carbon fiber, and it's probably my favorite thing ever. And the thing that's beautiful about it is that the way that the carbon fiber is made is that you can create stiffness in a way that you can't with a steel frame bike or an aluminum bike or a titanium bike. And the way that the weaves intermix with one another, that you can create something incredibly strong and at the same time very, very light and responsive and all that. So my family and I fly to Somerset, and we live in Somerset from September to January. Somerset's in England. Hauser and Worth in Somerset invited myself and my family to live there in residence. Our children went to public school. They learned about World War II, but without the United States, which was really interesting. They know about, Everett knows Winston Churchill, and he knows the narrative of World War II, but totally omitted from that knowledge is American engagement in World War II until Dunkirk, right? So anyway, So I go there, and then I start to, I think, what is the most economic way that I can try as many things possible with the least amount of effort and make them still useful. So I made 8 chairs that took the geometry of the chair that I had settled on when I was in Wyoming, the height, angle, so on and so forth, and then applied like a sort of serpentine form over a series of like very geometric to more snaky and swoopy, and then developed some interlocking legs that went from geometric to very swoopy, and that you'll see here. If you have any questions, please stop me. So you can see, like, you know, really geometric to swoopy in the back. There's the first surface of the moon made in Formica. And the fun thing about developing this was that in order to keep Formica so that it can be sterile surface, you can't go more than 80 microns. 80 microns is like nothing, pretty much. And so trying to figure out the correct cut of the moon that I could take while keeping 80 microns from like essentially 0 to like 40-something thousand feet, which is the highest point of the moon. Well, they have no sea, so they just use the smallest sphere and the largest sphere to determine what those height differences are. And so, anyway, any questions? Okay. Snakes, interlocking snakes for legs. Snakes for legs. And step 1 and 2, right? You can see that it gets curvier. Step 3 and 4. Step 5 and 6. Step 6 here is the one that became the furniture that we developed. 7, which is hideous. I effed that one up. And then number 8, which is way too snaky. I don't know how you feel about it, but and these are all held together with yarn, fiberglass, and the cardboard boxes are the cardboard boxes that my family shipped our stuff in became the tables and the seat. And so the seat, I figured out the proper form of the seat, and then that's glassed over the top of it, and you'll see more of that in a second. Insulation foam, bisected golden mean, and then I started thinking about like the meaning of the golden mean and how this is tied to like thinking about the organization of a picture plane for landscape. And then I thought, like, well, what would be like a contemporary golden mean? And the contemporary golden mean is a 2-square rectangle, which is a piece of plywood, 4 by 8, 1 by 2, so on and so forth. And if you don't agree, you're wrong. No. Snakes, tables. And then that's them put together. And so I wanted to test 8 different legs, so all of them were interchangeable, so that you could like flippy flop them and use them interchangeably. And then those are, and so something at the same meeting, and I'm going back in time. I'm back in Montevipola. And Timo and I have stayed the night in this like really cool, weird hotel that used to be the like director of the Sarlaccius paper company, like his house. And it had the largest piece of plain glass window in all of Finland for like 50 years or something. Weird, beautiful place. And at this point, I'm still like really struggling. I'm not getting enough sleep and like trying to stay awake with Timo on the train. And he's like, well, now we should talk about the catalog. And I was like, oh no. Like, to think about a bunch of images of my work and then essays about the work is like the furthest thing from things that I want to do right now. And so just kind of, oh wait, I didn't say anything until we got to the hotel. At the hotel, we go upstairs. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna stay awake. So I had this brilliant idea. I was like, I'm just gonna get a martini. That'll keep me awake. And so I order a martini, I sit down, and he's like, okay, well, the catalog. And I was like, you know, Timo, like, let's just like make a role-playing game. And he's like, well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because
My brother-in-law is, essentially like the Finnish god of role-playing. His name's Johanna Pedersen, and is like deeply involved in role-playing, which culturally, though, role-playing is like it's like everybody in here, if we were all finished, it wouldn't be uncommon that we all play role-playing games, and which is really cool. So at this point, one of these prototypes has flown back to Finland with this company called Made by Choice, which is Nicholas, who I told you about, whose great aunt was Marie Gulliksen, and at the same point, we started using these tables to develop the role-playing game. But I'll show you first the prototype. So after all of the physical work was done, that's when we made our first technical drawing. But the thing that was exciting about it is that all of the comfort and the geometry of the chair didn't change, because that had already been worked out in the prototyping of like me making things out of cardboard and fiberglass and yarn or whatever. And so this is like really unique. And I think that the reason why it continued was because Made by Choice recognized that I didn't work like a designer, because I'm not really a designer. I like making stuff. It doesn't, who were we talking last night? Talking about making stuff. Is there somebody, Kaylin, I can't remember. Anyway, so, hi, okay, I'm just like blind. Yeah, okay, well, just wait, you might be really tired of me in like 3 hours. So, and so like everything's moving forward. I'm working on this role-playing game, and at the same time as the furniture and the role-playing game, that we're devising like a sort of idea around like what this exhibition will be at the museum. And I'll show you that in a second. Oh, and also while I'm making all of these things, I'm also working towards the show that was in Somerset that you'll also see images of later. All these things sort of connect to each other in the end. Sorry. Here's the second incarnation of the Formica lunar surface. More pictures of it. It was too flat, too graphic. These ones are way too graphic too. This is getting better. It's softer. Oh, so this is out of place. Remember the metal plate that I was talking about that I saw at the Formica factory? They basically, all the Formica that you have, like the wood grain Formica or stone or whatever, the surface that they put into the layers of epoxy impregnated paper, that's what Formica is made from a giant steel embossing plate. And this is an image of the plate that I developed with Formica. And so the thing that's kind of beautiful about this, and the whole point of why I'm telling you this story, is the most meaningful thing in all the things that I'm talking about right now, is that whether it be Timo or Tarja or Polly or Niklas or Sebastian or Lasse or Hanu, that there was like a collection of people that was starting to happen that were all using their best skills to come together to make something that they hadn't before, and to work in ways that they hadn't before, myself and all the people included. And so ostensibly, what we were doing was playing. And I think that playing is relegated to the duties of a child, and how we think about it as being like not intellectual, how it's like easy, how it's something that adults don't really do. But I think that speaking to an audience of artists and designers and other creative people, not creatives, I hate that word, but this is, in order to achieve this realm of play, I needed to maintain a sense of vulnerability where I could be wrong, and so that I could try something that I hadn't before. And I feel like that is like the main gist of like why I'm showing you all these like really boring images. I could show you artwork, but I feel like artwork just shows you the end progress, and that's not interesting. The most interesting part is the pursuit. The pursuit of being an artist is more important than making the thing, than finishing the thing, or like to design the thing that goes to production and is made in a factory and that people love it, and that's great. But I think that there is, in our lived moment, we're here only once, and I think that it is like to bring into our experience a vulnerable, a curious, engaged, aware person that were able to more deeply mine the I can't think of a better word, the like bullion of life. So more boring images, more Formica. And so the thing that's radical about this, I had no contract. There's no contract with Formica. I still don't have a contract with Formica. And you can go like Formica Europe, there's MDJQ, and it's like a material that you can buy. We still haven't figured out the contract part, but it's like having weird trust in a giant corporation, right? It was weird. And the fact that they trusted me as like somebody on the other end of the phone that they didn't know to like come up with this weird idea. It's like, you know, I think that we're all good at hearing no over and over and over and over again, and we're just stupid enough for whatever to like keep trying. And I think that that is like something about the community of artists that I know and love, that I always appreciate, that there is like such a rigor and toughness in that. And I feel like the moments of yes need to be seized with fervor. And it was remarkable that there were people in France and Germany and England and Finland, Italy, that all came together to make this possible. These are the files that made the surface. Okay, arts. At the same time while I was working in Somerset, I was working with the Butoh dancer in Berlin, and the drawings on the floor are sort of like free association drawings for a project that I'm working on with her. I won't go down that road because it's too much information, but in the background, these are flower drawing collage pieces that are all based on Jan Bruegel, the elder and younger, and who kind of like anchored the floral still life as a staying genre in painting, one of them. And here's tie-dye in the woods. Tie-dye in the woods. It'd be a good like Christmas carol. Like, this is a drawing that my family and I, Everett Flynn, because while I was working in Somerset, Laura was also working in Somerset, developing like some ceramics that she's been working on. And I was like, hey, you guys, like, let's do like a family sculpture. And so this is made from us sitting at a table all together, sort of talking about like, okay, and like, well, Everett Flynn, what do you think about this? And they're like, oh yeah, okay. And Laura does this part, and you guys do this part. Because at this time they were learning about World War II, so they're making a lot of airplanes. They were fascinated by them. And so we begin. There's the foundation, and I'm like hurrying this up. This is like not like, you know, like working with children is not like, yay, happy fun time all the time. It's like, God damn it. Can you just like not paint the drill? Oh, yeah. Family projects are really fun. And so these are like one of their friends that they made, and we painted this saying, like, I've given my children welding equipment, and we've sprayed with sprayers, and like I've probably been, but I think that children are really, really, you can trust them with a lot of things, and I think that to a certain degree we're not very trusting of our children. And their brilliance. And so I think that in a lot of cases they do kind of go above and beyond, or even over their head with what you would think they could do. But when given trust, I think that there's, at least in my experience, they've often excelled. I did help with this. I didn't force them to paint that whole thing white with a spray gun. I'm not an a-hole. I am an a-hole, but not like that. And so, anyway, but they painted this, and it was kind of inspired by Crater Lake. Like Crater Lake has anybody ever been to Crater Lake in Oregon? Anyone? One person? Very beautiful place. Oh, that was like another, I think there are trees in that one. That one's green. Yeah, that one's like without foliage. When I was in Berlin, so I've been thinking about chairs a lot, right? And as I'm sitting in Berlin and I'm at the Neue Wache, do you know what the Neue Wache is in? Does anybody know who Kate Kollwitz is? Right? Yes? Like if you're printmaking, if you study printmaking, like you know who Kathy Kollwitz is. But if you're like in painting or sculpture, like a lot of times it's not a name that comes up very often. For me, Kathy Kollwitz, when I was learning printmaking early on, was really like my jam, you know? Her and Ida Appelbrug. But I was sitting in the Neue Wache, and there's this very famous sculpture of mother and child. So if you just Google on your phone, because it's like easier than me doing it here, there's a sculpture of mother and child that is a Pietà. And as I'm sitting in the Neue Wache, sitting there in this very somber thing, I'd also gone just recently like on a bunker tour, which is like, you know, not fun. Bunker, like Nazi bunker tour. Anyway, so afterwards, then I go to see this Kathy Kollwitz sculpture of mother and dying child, and I'm sitting there and thinking about like how many people have made Pietà. Has anybody in here made a sculpture of Pietà? Or a thinker? Or how about a reclining figure? Wait, reclining figure. Who's reclining figure? Reclining figure. There's one other person. Where? There's a cult leader out there. Yeah, duh. Oh, you did? Okay, sorry, I just didn't see. But anyway, but it's like, you know, it forced me to think while I'm sitting there looking at Kathy Kollwitz's mother and dying child. It's like, it's like the sculpture isn't tired. It's the pose that's tired. It's the pose of the reclining figure that's tired. And so I started thinking about like, okay, if furniture is an armature that supports our bodies while we perform culture, right? That's like one way that I think about furniture. Then I'm like, well, what if like, you know, these poses, this woman and holding her dead child for eternity, that has to be exhausting. And so I thought, like, I would love to give, like, what would a chair look like to give her some relief so that she could hold this pose, so that she could remind us of this loss of life and how, and then it got me thinking about like the conceit of the Bauhaus, which was to develop sort of furniture and goods for everyone. At the same time, the military industry was developing weapons to kill without any like good or bad, indifferent, house, battlefield, goldfish, you know, aggressor, didn't matter. And that's like the cumulative sum of the military-industrial complex through the 20th century, is that it did achieve something that the Bauhaus couldn't achieve, was that we would be unified through the utility, through the use of these objects of design, unified in death, not in life, or in the celebration of culture, or in love for one another. And so as I'm sitting there, like I was like, okay, well, what's the most famous Bauhaus chair? Designers? It's that one. It's like been repeated over and over and over again. It's one of them, you know, but I'm like joking around, but it's a Vasily chair. And I was like, oh wait, it really, if you've ever seen photographs of Victorian like braces for photography to hold poses because this film was too slow, so they actually made braces so that you could stand there for long enough and not be blurry. And in looking at this chair, that it has some of that quality, that it almost kind of looks like a, like not medical device, but maybe like a crutch or a walker or like some other thing, like a frame that supports something. And so using these two chairs, I made a sculpture. I made a chair for Kathy Kollwitz, which is on the right, and a chair for Michelangelo's Pietà, which is on the left. The little brace on the bottom is what holds Mary's foot up slightly higher than her left foot to support her dead son's head. So the one on the right is so that the son can sit between mother's legs, crouching on the ground. Did anybody look up the Kollwitz mother and child, Neue Wache? Okay, it makes sense if you see the image. Oh, yeah. Here's Dea. She's rad. We learned how to make knives together. There's a knife blank. Has anybody ever made a knife? Anyway. That's my first knife that I've made. At the same time, while being in Somerset, I went to the Wells Cathedral. And during the English Civil War in like 1430, they busted out all the windows of the Lady Chapel of the Wells Cathedral. And over the next 50 years, they pieced back together all the bits and pieces of these broken windows. But if you look really close, like the thing that was so startling, and the reason why I'm showing it here, is because when they put it back together, they couldn't find all the parts and pieces. So when they put it back together, it was just like purely abstract. But when you walk underneath it, I've been to a lot of cathedrals, and I look up at the stained glass windows, and I'm like, I think that's Moses, and the purple one is, I can't remember. So the stories, like it's not expressing stories to me. So mostly what I'm feeling while walking under windows like this is that the light that comes in, which is like, like dancing color on the floor and the walls wherever the light's being projected in from our star. But walking underneath these things, I was like, oh, like I'm in a cathedral. It's beautiful and oppressive at the same time. And it feels normal. It feels like it should. But then when I looked up, I was like, oh, it's like the broken windows were just aggregate for a window to make you feel as though that you were underneath like a stained glass window as we've come to know them as being like a narrative, like a narrative artwork. Sorry, I'm running out of words. And so this is a close-up of them. And like, there were panels that were dedicated to heads. And then there was another panel that were dedicated to lions. There was another panel that was dedicated all to words. Another one that was dedicated to reds and greens. And so it was kind of like willy-nilly put back together. But it was put together over 50 years. Like, so to make something put together that was like largely abstract and just trying to fill a space, not just by one person, but by a group of people, and likely generations of people, was something that was like, wow, really heavy. And so when we think about, like, this is like got me thinking about making something, worrying about originality is stupid. And thinking about like how, like the sort of palimpsest of our experience and the things that we make and how that's built upon like all the history that came before us and people that we'll never know or never meet and things that we've never seen or even heard of, that is within the genetic fabric of the things that we make and the lives that we live. And there was something about looking at these windows where it's like, they don't even know really how long it took. They don't actually really know where all the glass came from, but it's like there, and like the sands of time obscure fact, but it also obscures fiction. And I think that there's something about, anyway, it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. Here's me melting lead into drawings. I'd made these drawings out of yarn, and the cutouts were the thing to keep the lead from pouring everywhere, and you'll see how they kind of fit together. These are all working towards the Somerset show. Simultaneously, what's happening in the other world is that there's a role-playing game being developed and furniture that's going into production that we're going to launch at Salone in Milan, which is like the premier furniture design exhibit every year. It's kind of like, I didn't realize it was a big deal. I just was like, yeah, it sounds great. We'll do Salone and go to Milan, and I get to see Bartholomew. That's really exciting. And so what comes out of those molds are these weird cast satellite forms that are made out of junk and cardboard and yarn and a bunch of other things, cast in lead, and then dropped into the voids of the paintings in the background. All the paintings in the background are taken from handheld camera astronaut photography of looking down on Earth. And it started because I wanted to see astronaut photography of looking at the stars. There aren't any. because there's something about, like, as far as we get away from home, or as far as we get away from Earth, the first thing that we're looking back on is ourselves and home. And I think that there's something about like needing to feel that sort of connection that keeps us in this sort of solipsistic kind of feedback loop. And so all these paintings, all these are part of a series, and they're called solipsists. But a solipsist needs a mirror. And so the way that the drawings, like after I pulled the lead out of the this like weird yarn wood assemblage, that I realized that the thing that was left over, which was an exact mirror of the lead piece, was actually very beautiful. And so I started using that to make these weird drawings. And they're not very good, but like I think that it's good to not show like greatest hits. But they're all rubbings from a lunar surface. And if you can't, I don't know if you can you see the moony surface there? I can't see from here. But I like thinking of the moon like grassed like a golf course. That's why they're all green. So inside the space, we carpeted the space using AstroTurf and delineated to suggest as though it could be a field of play. We developed a Frisbee game, me and Andy. Well, we didn't actually. It was just like a funny joke. 800 years ago, they were throwing these wreaths and trying to capture them on each other's head. And the first one to miss was decapitated. So in making the show, that the solipsists were divided into 4 basic groups, which were earth, water, land, and air. And what I was trying to achieve was finding photographs taken by astronauts of events on Earth which show an image of us, not in our person or in the buildings that we inhabit, but rather in like proof of our engagement with our natural environment. And so on the left is the Ural Sea, which is shrinking at a very radical rate, and pretty soon it will just be a dusty, salty memory of itself. On the right is our glaciers in Switzerland that are receding at an alarming rate. All of the satellites on top are all the profile of various surveillance satellites. And we can talk about that more later if you want, but probably not. There's a lot of information, and is everybody bored? Do you want me to hurry? You can be like, yeah, I'm fucking bored. No? Okay. You guys are just being nice. Man, when I was in graduate school, anybody who stood up here was just like, when like Wile E. Coyote, just like a turkey leg. I think that's like, and we would just ask really just, it was like weird sport. Like, yeah, well, what about that thing that you just made that you just totally went against everything, blah, blah, blah. And so thanks. But, and so these ones are aerial views of forest fires. The one on the left is an aerial view of an open pit mining, where you can't see the buildings, you can't see the machines, you can just see the scar. And so with the fires too, you can't see the fire, you can't see the fire trucks, you can't see the smoke jumpers, you can't see anything, but you can only see the byproduct of it. And that was all inspired. Have you all seen the Werner Herzog film of the burning oil fields after the Kuwait War? No? Beautiful. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. But those trails, when I first saw images of it, have you ever cut yourself underwater? Right? Or like painted with watercolor, right? That like the way that the blood, or if you've seen Jaws, like I love that, like with a stream of blood, like clouds of water. And that's like what the smoke from the burning fields look like from the point of view of ISS, International Space Station. And I loved how, like, when I'm looking at it, it looks like it's bleeding because the smoke that's coming out is black, and it's like a type of smoke that you're not accustomed to seeing. Like, usually smoke is white, but how much black smoke came out of those burning oil fields was like, earth is bleeding. It forced me to think about it as being like a body, and so that's why I tried to make these paintings. And so they're all made out of formica. Like flattened earth made out of a material that's trying to be something else, while at the same time nothing else in particular. There are some darker like narratives that sort of writhe under the surface of these things. On the top of them, they've been screen printed, and the sort of rules are black shows the location of the sun. So whenever I'm screen printing the black on the surface of the formica, so if you could think about Earth, if you were to light Earth uniformly, it would be flat, right? Like if you light a sphere evenly, it takes that sphere and makes it totally flat because you get rid of all the shadows, right? And so I liked thinking about, like, what if I was to evenly light Earth, right? And then that got me thinking about like how the satellites are in fact not absorbing images, but rather occupying like all of Earth's atmosphere. And as it's taking data of our engagement with nature as we like drive our cars and Google or whatever, that it is actually illuminating Earth and flattening it, right? That's how I think about it. And so all of the black on the images is to show topography, whereas the formica is trying to mimic the colors and tones of the actual stuff of Earth. In the case where there's white, white is either clouds, smoke, or accumulation. And so they follow like a very strict guideline of how they all come together. Anyway, so, okay. That's the mouth, right? Where it opens into the sea, that's the mouth, right? Of the Ganges River, which is one of the most populated rivers in the world. And to the right is a series of open pit mines, I think in New Mexico. And that's a close-up of the lead pushed into the surface of the paintings. And this is them installed. In the middle of the room is a yew tree. A yew tree is, I learned about the yew tree because every cemetery that I would go to in England, and actually my morning ritual was I would run from Bruton to Castle Carey, and at Castle Carey I would make 2 loops around the graveyard of Castle Carey and then run home, because I thought it was like a funny thing to do, like I'm trying to like work off the beer that I drank the night before, the stupid cigarette that I smoked, while like thinking about death. And so in the far side, that's the chair for Michelangelo's Pietà. And in the foreground here is chair for Katikowicz's mother and dead child, I believe. And the paintings were organized earth, air, water, help me, fire, earth. And it got me thinking too, like one of the shows coming up, I think it's going to be called like You Can't Pollute the Fire, because that's like, that's a beautiful idea. Or Tunnel of Babel. I think the next, it would be either like You Can't Pollute Fire or Tunnel of Babel. And here's the Queen. Queen came. It's really surreal. And she was like perfectly color-coded with these paintings. I mean, it was like kind of, and I think that she like researched maybe. It was really funny. So, and this is what the drawings look like. So the paintings are all called solipsist, and these are all called mirror. So it's like looking down on Earth over the satellite and then imagining that you were on your back looking at the satellite up at the sky, and it kind of disappears. More pictures. And everybody, family sculpture. And so I made the tables and chairs. Laura made all of the setting. The children, Everett and Flynn, painted and inhabited the landscape with Big Doggy. There's Big Doggy. I'll show you Big Doggy. And Flynn made a sculpture of me, which is really funny. And in the background, and Laura and I worked on our first collaborative artwork together, or not artwork, I guess like design thing, which is the chandelier, which is the topography of the moon. We thought of it like as when the moon goes in front of the sun, eclipse. And in the background are the floral drawings. All the pieces in the background are made out of fabric, collage fabric, screen print. The bucket in the foreground of all of the paintings, every single flower piece that I've ever made has the same exact face, and it is based on Jim Jones's, on the bucket that they mixed Flavor Aid and cyanide in Jonestown. If you have any questions, I can tell you more about that. But and so Everett and Flynn made the pterodactyl, and there's a B-29 up there, and there's also an Apollo 11 Lego. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the bearded guy right there. Stalagmites and mushrooms. And I think Big Doggy's in there somewhere. Oh, no. But and so I'm showing you these things. It's like a finished show, the genesis of furniture, and at the same time, like singing a song for y'all is like kind of like a thing that I like to do. And I like, in our experience of Somerset, these are some things that happened. My children chased cows. I picked wine grapes for the first time, Bacchus. I was particularly interested in this because Bacchus, like Dionysus becomes Bacchus, the god of wine, so on and so forth. And did you know that when it gets cold, they've actually developed candles that they light in a vineyard to make sure that the grapes don't freeze? And that I was like, weirdly wasteful and sweet at the same time. And this is Steve Harrell in the very foreground, who's like an amazing chef. And that's Jules, his partner, who run the Roth Bar in Hauser and Wirth. Like, is spectacular people. My kids learned about football. I did a bike race. I did another bike race. That was a cyclocross race. I performed in my first opera. I also saw my first opera and listened to an opera in its entirety all at the same time at the performance at Shotwell Farm. If you all have ever a chance, there's a man named Neil Hobhouse that runs a collection called Drawing Matters, and they're all architectural renderings. It's very special. This is where we lived. I got a tattoo of my family with all the characters from Mount Analog by René Dumont. Has anybody read that? Willie, have you read that? Oh, okay. If everybody could read that, you should read it. It's an amazing, very, very short book, which is startling and very, very beautiful. It's an allegory of creativity, and I think that you would get a lot from it. Here's the beginning. Dido and Aeneas by Purcell is a story of two lovers kept apart by witchcraft. And so when I was learning about the story, I was like, oh, well, like oil and water don't mix. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just do like a liquid light show over the opera and over these drawings that were all projected from a tomb. And that Neil and I and Kendra had all worked together to sort of make this setup, and it became one of the most beautiful evenings. There's something that I do occasionally when I have a very beautiful evening, like I'll force myself to stay awake as long as I possibly can so that the day doesn't end. There's and I think that like in this, that it's like an engagement of trying something totally new that was very scary. It goes without comparison in terms of what I learned from that. Here's part of the setup. Liquid dye, oil, and some like, I think those are Super Studio drawings underneath there. Maybe, is that Super Studio? Neil had a whalebone captain's chair, and I could talk for hours about that, but I won't. Right next to where we lived, there was a man that rescued injured birds of prey, and my children got to take care of. The one that Everett got to take care of is the one in the left corner that's staring at me like it wants to eat me. I can't remember its name. And if you like junk fairs, if you've been to a junk fair in the United States, like, nah. in Shepford Mallet, I think that's the name of the town, they have a junk fair that is without rival, like the greatest things. That is a katana that is World War II that I own now. And this is at the top of Glastonbury Tor. It's very windy. The kid in the foreground is my son Everett, and the guy in the background is my son Flynn. And there's like getting to experience a residency as a family and to be involved in so many things where my children were an active participant in the creation of like what was an exhibition and an experience is like pretty radical. Right after I went to Shanghai and ate the most beautiful, weirdest food I've ever had. That's jellyfish and 1,000-year-old eggs. And they were like topaz, like the most beautiful food I've ever had. And the artist who bought them, he was like, well, will you eat this thing? I was like, yeah, I'll try anything. And I think he was like, all right, well, here you go. Let's see if you can handle it. And I actually really enjoyed them. But it was like eating jewelry or something. They're very beautiful. Also in Somerset, I organized with some friends the No Thanksgiving. And we had a very beautiful evening of fire and friends. There's Doug Fishburne, who's a fantastic artist, very funny. He's like a comedian. There's friends at Somerset. And I actually think that, like, you know, everybody, has anybody been to Stonehenge? So, like, Stonehenge is, like, right next to the road, and it makes a traffic jam that's epic. And my theory is that it's just like a Texaco that closed down, just like 4,000 years ago. And it's like, that's where, like, you know, monks and druids would like stop off for smokes and like to use a bathroom and like to write like for a good time call, like, you know, I don't know any druid names. You know any druid names? Anyway, here's a Christmas tree that I made. There's it decorated. There's it with presents. And this is Howard. Howard taught me how to play snooker at the Burton Unionist Club. And I organized an evening where we were going to repaint the room. So I invited the town of Bruton to enter into a raffle to, this is an invite. All proceeds went to a facelift of the Stucker facilities where Bruton Unionist Club, Quaker Lake Street, Bruton. And this is the snooker cue that I made. We raised like 600 pounds. And so they're able to fix the room, and they were like, and Howard was like, the only thing that cannot change is that the Queen and Winston must stay. I was like, all right, cool. So we're getting there, everybody. And this is in Milan, like the first like design thing that I've ever done. And we launched what is now called Kolho. And it was written about in more than I've ever had anyone write about anything that I've ever done, ever. It was written about in Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, English, French, Spanish, in Spain and in Mexico, and English, of course. But that was, I didn't recognize that like in making a chair, it's like that there's a tradition, and like if you make a sort of like weird rupture in that it like means something. It was surprising. And these are just, this is Sammy Talberg. I don't know if you can hear him. Oh, shoot. No, sorry. Sammy Talberg is this beautiful chef. And I was saying earlier that if you could make a mold for like what a white masculine person should be, they should just kill all the rest of them and just make them exactly like Sami, because he's generous, affectionate, brilliant, sensitive, and like really, really funny, and does not drink very much, which is positive. Anyway, tables and chairs. This was the exhibit. There's my partner, Laura. She's really rad. And so all the tables that you're looking at are all held together by tension. There are no fasteners and no tools necessary to put them together. And I will show you, hopefully. Here's some moody pictures taken by, oh my gosh. Sorry, I'll remember in a second. Really killer Finnish artist. And these are pictures of the rectilinear tables. And here's an image of the fastening system and it taken apart. So those 4 legs lock into each of the 4 corners, making 2 X's. The part in the middle that looks like a lever fits into those 2 X's like a ski boot. And when you push it down, it makes a blink. And then you put the wooden peg in. So it actually does have one fastener. It has a wooden peg. And that was very fun to make. And so here's the exhibition in Syracuse, which gave birth to all the things that I just showed you. Who was I talking to about the real doll earlier today? Yeah, okay. That's the real doll. The face of it is the woman of the Seine. Who was I talking to? Yeah, the woman of the Seine. And the torso, it was all made from sticks that I found in Wyoming. And here's it. Like the packing job was just so rad. I was in love with it. So here's a sculpture I made in 2013 that now lives permanently in Syracuse at the museum, which is like, you know, there's like, I think that I'm fortunate that I'm able to sell art to make my studio possible. But when a museum in a beautiful place decides that they want to take care of something forever and give it a place to live, there's, I think that one of the things about contemporary art is that things are so temporary and that they move back and forth and they can kind of be in any setting, but like to have something that lives permanently. So I have two permanent artworks in Finland. And so it's kind of like, oh, that's the house. That's the house that we were in. We got smoked out, and I found this whole thing with my friends. There's Peter cradling the flesh of Michelangelo. And this is the exhibition. Do you have any questions? I just think that just to look at them might be good. In the far ground, the painting is the exact same dimensions and geometry of Monet's water lilies. I'm in love with those paintings because they're a reflection of the sky on this surface of Earth. And so there's like, it ties into a lot of work that I've made revolving around exploration, namely like the Formica, like wanting to make the dark side of the moon in this material that doesn't show a trace of our being there or engaging with it. And at the same time, that we've made a lot of work that was the surface of the moon etched in drywall, and like the dustiness and like it's like commonplace material is always something that I'm drawn to. Here's a sculpture that you just saw installed. It's called Real Doll, and I wanted to make a sculpture that was a diagram of like how I feel that we engage with nature. It has both protrusions and orifices. It has body hair. It's totally positionable. So it's a brutal sculpture. That I could, yeah. It's sad. It's a sad thing, I think. And the pipes that go to it make it breathe, and periodically its vaginal canal becomes an erection. And as it's sleeping, you know when your dog sleeps and it's whimpering and barking and maybe running in place, and you're like, oh, like Beastie is like hanging out, or like hates the dog next door, or she must have, or doing something, right? But maybe she's just like dreaming about the most exciting color shapes she's ever dreamt about, right? Or maybe it's like something that we don't even have words for. And I think that there's something about how we like personify or anthropomorphize like nature, the animals around us. And this is like the thing that's kind of sickening about like how we need to see a reflection of ourselves in order to exist, which goes back to like wanting to make these paintings called solipsist, or even not to believe, or even refusing to believe things that we have not directly experienced, right? That this is like a shape of things to come. And so when men get erections when they sleep, it is physiological. It could be totally dismembered from any dream or fantasy. It's just like a thing that happens. And so like when you think about bodies emoting, right, but without words or without facial expression, that's like one way that a body emotes. And so periodically through the show, it breathes. Its rib cage goes up and down, but in varying different, but you'd never ever hear it breathe. It's only making so it's not giving you like fake breathing. It's not a medical device. It's animatronic. And so I never ever wanted the sculpture to ever give the illusion of life. It was just performing, sleeping. It's a long story. That's me in a cooler that was a part of the exhibition. So that's the surface of that painting. So the cumulative sum of working with the museum, the curator, the Johanna Pedersen, Tarja Vatanen, that we made this game. I made the font, we designed the map, made this very beautiful thing. And so it basically provides the network, the sort of rules for how one could potentially not only view the exhibition, but play it and treat the character, treat the sculpture, treat the figurative sculpture in the museum show as like little lead Dungeons and Dragons figures. It's a long story, so I won't bore you now, so you're just gonna have to trust me on it. But I designed the box, the rainbow paper, those are character sheets, and on the other side shows all of the attributes. I also made these dice in the studio with Emily Ritzman, and they're meant to be dropped into something soft. The die on the left, which is like a rainbow spectrum, I've always thought of that as a possibility. And then the dice on the right, which is supposed to be viewed from the top and like phases of the moon, from like on to off, right to left, black to white, good to bad, yes, no, so on and so forth. But because there's no like numbers and no marks on the die, that the players can determine what these things mean in live time throughout the entire game, constantly changing. The cards I designed, and that's a whole other story, but the dice came from this ball that Flynn bought, or I bought for Flynn, and it turned into that. These were incredibly complicated things to make, like way harder than anything we've ever made. These are furniture that I made with Laura. That started as an argument, and then it turned into a bar. Usually goes the other way around. And it's all made out of cardboard and fiberglass. A lounge chair made out of cardboard, fiberglass, and burl wood found in the woods. They turned into that. That's called a bardenza, and it's like, I'm calling these things wonky. And that's where my drag name came from, Wonky Bardenza. Yeah. Those are the knobs. Those are the cast-off dice that didn't work out. And this was just recently shown in Miami in the design fair. And what happened was that after the success of the Colho line, the owner of Future Perfect saw pictures of the furniture that I made with Laura, and he's like, "Oh, can we show those in Miami?" And I was like, "Sure." And weirdly, people really liked them. This is all made out of Amazon boxes, but it's painted Miami blue and Porsche 2019. It's a color that Porsche has in their thing, and it's like, I don't ever want a Porsche, but the blue one like that is really beautiful. And there's a table that's made out of scrap wood from making sculpture, and a mattress box wrapped in fiberglass. It's very light and super, super strong. Stools made out of packing corners, like if you get a flat screen TV, and chunks of plywood that are just left on the studio floor from making sculpture. And these are actually chairs made from one cardboard box. So they were boxes, I can't remember what the box was for, but it was about like this big. And so I just made some cuts and then like closely approximated sitting. Of course it wouldn't support my weight, but like put my butt in it to make it do that. Oh, the other thing, that chair, the lounge chair, the way that I made the form that I was sitting in is I took a piece of cardboard, you know, the like fabric X chairs, the fabric, I can't remember what they're called, wing chairs. I just put a piece of cardboard in it and sit in the cardboard, and that makes a form. Anyway. And there's our bed. It's like funny Photoshop. And it's made out of cardboard and some like found wood. That's it. So I think that there is, like what I'm trying to achieve in work coming up is to be as open as possible and to pay attention to the world around me and recognize that there are a lot of people that are like willing to play and try something new. Thanks. I have nothing else. Do you have any questions? I need to work on I need to have more variance in how I talk. I recognize that. No questions? Anybody? Anybody? Yep. Hi.